Today we're going to start talking about data tables and experimental design and how they pertain to your science fair experiments. So data tables are used when we work with numbers, and this is a way so that we can organize the numbers so that they're useful, and they also make them an easier way to interpret or read those numbers. So they can be done in many different ways. So for instance, this data table has a title at the top, "When should Mr. Fox drink his coffee?" And then it labels both quantitative and qualitative data. So over here, it measures the time in minutes, which would be the independent variable, and the temperature in degrees Celsius, which would be the dependent variable. So you'll notice that as time goes by, the temperature of the coffee drops. Data tables can also be arranged. You see the independent variables, the names of the people, and the dependent, and they also have these are the trials, the names of the people, and then the independent variable, which would be these across the top that show the different fruits. And then underneath, this could be something, since there's no title, this could indicate how many of them they ate, which would be a lot. 100 apples is quite a bit. But this data table doesn't really tell us a lot that's going on, but for the actual researcher, this could be considered pretty useful. So another data table, a little more simple. Does water pH affect tadpoles? So they have the pH of water, which is the independent variable, and the number of tadpoles in that area, which would be the dependent variable. And then in this one, you see that it doesn't really tell us what the experiment is about, but it does show us multiple trials. And then the blocks going across the top, which are the independent, and the centimeters down the side, which are the dependent variables, with an average column at the bottom for all three trials. So in your packet, I want you to open to the part that says Investigation Design Experiment. And we're going to start by writing out a title for our own experiment. So don't copy the ones that I'm putting on the screen right now. What I want you to do is just pause the video and write in what the answers would be for your science fair experiment. So for instance, for me, if my title were to be The Effects of Fertilizer on Plant Growth, I would put that in the title section. And then under that, where it says my question or my testable question, I could say, how does the amount of fertilizer used affect the height of the plant? So you'll notice that in this question, I have my independent variable, the amount of fertilizer, and my dependent variable, the height of the plant. Next, I need to write down my hypothesis. So my hypothesis is going to be an if, then, because statement based on my question. So if I use more fertilizer, then my plant will grow taller because the fertilizer is food for the plant. And then underneath this, we have a table that starts to organize some of our thoughts. So the first part of this is our independent variable. So for mine, I know that my independent variable is the amount of fertilizer used. Remember that you're going to put here whatever your independent variable will be for your experiment that you're doing for science fair. Now you'll notice along the side, the next thing it says over here is the levels of independent variable, including the control group. So if I were to input in what I was going to do, my control group is the group that receives no treatment or no fertilizer, and then I would do a group with 1 milliliter, a group with 5, a group with 10, and 15 milliliters. Underneath that, it says repeated trials, or the number of times each of the levels of the independent variable was tested. So in a perfect world, I would test each of those 10 times. So I might have 10 plants that I'm testing for each one of those groups. That's a lot of plants, so I could do something like 3 plants, but you do want to make sure that you have repeated trials, because those repeated trials help give you a better indicator of whether or not your independent variable is affecting that dependent. Underneath, we see we need our dependent variable, and in this, our dependent variable is going to be the actual growth of the plant, which I'm going to measure in centimeters. And then under that, it says constants. And if you look down here, it says factors in an investigation that are kept the same are not allowed to change or vary. So some of my constants that I might be looking for in this specific design would be the type of plant, the age of plant, the amount of water given to the plant, the soil type, and the sunlight. I want to make sure that all of those stay the same so that I know whether or not my fertilizer is actually affecting that plant growth. So on the next page, you'll see that there's a materials section. So this is where, just like last night for homework, I want to kind of list out these materials. So for me, I might think of things like I need pea plants in order to do my experiment on. I need soil. I need pots to put the plants in. I need access to water. I'm going to need fertilizer, the type of fertilizer that I want to test. I also am going to need a graduated cylinder because I'm testing this fertilizer in milliliters, and I need to be able to measure that out. And then in order to test the actual height of the plants, I need a ruler. So these, off the top of my head, are the few materials I might need. Start listing out some of the materials that you might need for your experiment. Procedure. When I talk about the procedure, these are the steps that I need in order to carry out this experiment, and they need to be very specific and concrete. And when I say that, I mean if you were to give this experiment to a kindergartner, they would be able to replicate it easily because you are so specific in your procedure. So for me, I might say the first step is to plant the pea plants in the soil and take my initial measurements. My second step is water the pea plants with 200 milliliters of water each. The third would be to put fertilizer in with the designated plants, all except the control, for the amount that is indicated on the table. So for the plant group 1, I'm going to put 1 milliliter in. For group 2, 5. For group 3, 10, and so on. My step 4 is to measure the plants every day for 4 weeks. My step 5 is record the data in my table. And then step 6, I need to then analyze this data. So when I need to set up a data table in order for me to record my stuff in. So you'll notice that on the data table template page, you can start substituting in some of your variables. And what this is just a blank table to kind of guide you of what your table should look like or what it should be aiming to look like in a similar way. So you want to make sure right now that you're putting in your independent, your dependent, and your title. Those are the 3 things that we know so far for our experiments, and we can start using that data table template page. So go ahead and start looking over that and start working on that as much as you possibly can at this point.